prime example, South Africa I have given there. Reconciliation. In regard to reconciliation, the biggest issue we have, I think, is internationalization of domestic issues, which I referred to before at the very beginning. Failure to examine issues objectively based on empirical observations and yield into rhetoric. Okay. There is also power play within and among governmental agencies and among other actors as well. That also affects reconciliation. Sorry, I don't have time. I'm going over just very briefly. Talking about reconciliation, it is very important to understand that unity cannot be established through reconciliation between just two communities by addressing real or perceived grievances of only one community. That seems to be happening here. Some people seem to think by addressing grievances, perceived grievances, I would say, of only one community, we can bring about reconciliation between two communities. You can't do that. There are grievances for both, okay, or even more than two communities, and all of that have to be addressed. There's a need to address grievances and perceptions of all communities and find some common ground by focusing on one community, however humanitarian that may seem like. We may exacerbate the problems and further divide the nation. Okay, that's the danger there. The talking about the issues, if I may again add something. Sorry, okay, maybe I'll finish very quickly. I'm almost there now. When the LLRC was having its sittings, we had witnesses coming before us, not ordinary people. Ordinary people mostly said something else, but there were organized groups and organized individuals. So I asked the Bishop of Jaffna, I asked the Bishop of Mana, and I asked some NGOs this question, separately of course at different hearings. Every time they referred to Tamils have been discriminated in this country for a long time, discriminated. So I asked, all right, can you please, for our benefit, list the discriminations one by one. Tell us, for us to understand it better. So, and then I tell them, all right, I will give you an official act was the Official Languages Act. That's a governmental act, right? So the government is responsible. Then the university admissions, all right, government, right? The quota system that was introduced at that time, which affected them obviously. And then I would say, all right, 1983 riots, but that mob action, but 83 something else happened. There was some partially government responsibility there. Okay. Burning of the Jaffna library. Library is an important thing for them, but that's mostly mob violence, right? And so I'll tell them this. Now and and then there have been other communal riots. Those of course happen in any country, anywhere. Just like a husband and wife fights, when more than one human being, that happens. Okay, that's nothing new. Families, all that happens. They couldn't list. They go silent. But the rhetoric is being discriminated for a number of years, and this, and then it affects the listener, obviously, right? And if you ask, list one by one, and I say we give all that. That is fine. We have to give. I mean, that's true, right? So that's the kind of rhetoric that is being used even now, even in international forums. You probably experienced that, right? Anyway, so future. As regards the future, we must examine domestic issues adequately using empirical science. I hope that happens. If we do that, that will put us on a good footing. Then we can argue in international forums everywhere. We can show we are not what they say. Simply us saying we are not what they say won't matter. Don't matter. And we have to address them head on. And also, I have mentioned here, devolve power to the people, sovereignty to the people. I know Mr. Mohan Piris addressed the sovereignty, but I am addressing it in a different way. 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes. I remember I said before whether Sri Lanka is a failed nation, but in the chapter 2, when we say neither party, neither political party of the majority, right, and others, the governments one after the other fail to address these issues. It says there. I'm very sorry to say, but if you really look at the facts, various governments tried. There was modification of the system of government, parliamentary democracy to a dual republican parliamentary democracy. electoral system was introduced. These are all introduced hoping that it will help, right? First past post electoral to a district based preferential system. Administrative systems and mechanisms were introduced. Politically appointed regional governors, elected provincial councils exercising control over the civil administration. Law and law enforcement methods and processes, emergency regulations, PTA, police assuming some defense role, and the defense forces assuming some policing role in order to prevent terrorism and protect people, right? Security. So several things. I just listed only a few here and there. Anyway, so in contrast, there was hardly a noteworthy tangible action taken by the international community to stop ramifications until the incidents of 9/11. They didn't do anything until then, those who complain that we are a failed state. Okay. Since 9/11, the threat posed by the LTT received some attention from them due to the ramifications resulting from LTT support networks abroad, including the diaspora, because they were committing crimes there and they were threatening security. That is the reason. And from a global security point of view also they became interested, as I said before. And both the governmental and non-governmental NGOs shifted their focus to examine the countermeasures adopted by Sri Lanka and the foreign governments and UN agencies in curbing terrorist activities. That became the focus after 9/11 and the measures. And after the tsunami, many NGOs and INGOs became increasingly involved in Sri Lanka, originally of course for good purposes. The assumption that in Sri Lanka majority and minority can be identified, then there is another thing that goes on in the rhetoric. Okay, if you go to other countries or read, you can see the rhetoric is that the majority and minority, they usually identify quantitatively. They say 80% or whatever, 78% Sinhalese, 18% Tamil, whatever. In other words, they count it by numbers. A majority and minority in Sri Lanka especially cannot be identified quantitatively by simply counting. It is fallacious. I will tell you why. When you look at the history, the demographics and political and social conditions of Sri Lanka, you see that we cannot do that. There have been disparities based on treatment and allocation of resources among and between rural and urban communities. Rural communities have been minorities for a long time, right? Maybe even today in some places. And urban communities also in some places are minorities in that sense. And then there are other demographic groups as well. Okay, if you really look at it that way, really discrimination-wise, as discrimination. These disparities could have created feelings of discontent, suspicion, and even discriminatory attitudes and perceptions. These disparities must be addressed for there to be true reconciliation and unity among all the people of Sri Lanka, not just some communities. That is the point I want to really drive very hard. After the independence, if you look at the history, an upper class of minority comprised of different ethnicities ruled this country. It was not just one ethnicity, right? To the exclusion of majority underclass. Majority underclass were never rulers. Those who went to village schools, never learned English, could not hold, never became rulers, never were administrators or managers or whatever. Okay, this led to that is what led to the leftist political movement led by intellectuals such as Dr. Colina de Silva, N.M. Pera, etc., etc., etc. And then S.W.R.D. Bandaranaike entered the picture. He provided a different alternative from the left, a promise of rural upheaval, and majority of the underclass then joined him. That led to a huge electoral victory, right? Later, when the leftists joined Mrs. Bandaranaike's government and they focused mainly on the urban labor, then of course the rural and other underclasses revolted with an insurrection in 1971. That's what happened. That led to the adoption by the government of various policies to appease rural youth, and some of those policies led to marginalization of other minority groups, especially ethnic minorities. That is for example, the university quota system. I'm speaking too fast, but I hope you can read. Okay, I know I have a tendency to speak very fast. Even my students tell me sometimes I speak too fast. Okay, so, sorry. I usually, when I talk to students, I try to slow down, but I don't have time. That's why I'm okay, I'm sorry. Maybe 2 minutes. Okay, sorry. So since independence, various governments attempted to address these grievances, etc., etc. And we have to look at all of these factors: industrialization, commercialization that benefited cities, urban areas, to the exclusion of rural populations, official language, all those things. The affected ethnic minorities bought into the political rhetoric of their political leaders, such as Mr. Selvanayakam, Vadukkode Resolution 1976, a milestone in the history of communal politics of Sri Lanka. That is what led to secessionist tendencies among Tamil-speaking minority youth. And 1983 communal riots exacerbated the situation, And however, the problem I have is based on that, they took to violence and they say that violence is justified. This is the question I like to pose. Gandhi in India, Martin Luther King in the US succeeded with their peaceful protests against repression. In Sri Lanka, though, there should be a period there, and then in Sri Lanka, such leadership did not evolve among the Tamil political leaders. They abandoned the Tamil people. They either ran away for safety or they just abandoned. Okay? Violence took charge. So thus the youthful rebellion, revolt and insurgency took root, and that later transformed into brutal terrorism. This is my analysis. Okay? So under the present constitution, of course, we have a problem. Some political and bureaucratic institutions seem to be crumbling. This is one of the major problems that we have to address in any constitutional reforms. I know Mr. Mohan Peris addressed the sovereignty of the people, but if you look at the reality, it seems the general public has become powerless and helpless to a point that they have become completely dependent on politicians whom they have to run for every minute decision. One of the drivers told me he has to go to the MP to get a bed for his wife, when the wife is admitted to deliver a baby at the hospital. I mean, that's very pathetic. Right? That's pathetic. That is not democracy. Okay, I'm sorry. That people have no rights, that means. And some elites and politicians exercise the power. This has led to corruption, lack of people participation in decision making. And so addressing, that is why I say addressing ethnic harmony alone will not solve the ills of the Sri Lankan society. We have to be very careful when we talk about all this, reconciliation, etc. Reconciliation between whom, what, that type of. So I put this in bold letters. There is no national, and then they talk about there is a national question. Mr. Sumandiran, TNA, they say there's a national question. You know what they mean? They are not talking about national issues. National, nation, that's what they mean. Tamil nation, the question of the nation of Ilam, that's what they are talking about as the national question. This is what they talk in international forums everywhere. I would say there is no, we have to say this loud, there is no national question. There are national issues rooted at the social level that we all admit, I already mentioned in fact. Okay? So there is no national question to be resolved with ethnic harmony or whatever, reconciliation or whatnot. So anyway, let me move on here, and I have just one more thing. That is the last probably slide I want to. There has to be an appropriate political process, a process that involves public consultation. This is why I am not in favor of I'm sorry to say this, I have been saying this of course for a long time, since several years. I have said this publicly in my interviews and publications. When the government appointed an all-party conference to do a constitution, I criticized that. I made this point. I said that will end up in failure because we are seeing problems with how the politicians are running the country, and we are asking the same politicians to come up with a constitution to solve the problems. That will never happen. They will do whatever that favors them, not what favors the people. They will not put the people ahead, they will put them ahead, right? How can we rule even better? How can we rule these people? So we have to have a process that involves public consultation. In fact, on this point, I can say the United Nations Human Rights HRC has put out a document on rule of law, how rule of law can be created through public consultation, just on that topic even, which is very, if you can get hold of it, read it, you can find it probably on the web if you go to UN and look for that. And then the other thing, people talk about, oh, okay. Okay, then let me, sure. Okay, here's the last sentence. Last sentence in bold letters. In a democracy, inequities need not be resolved for reasons of fairness or distributive justice, but simply because such inequities undermine democratic legitimacy. That is why we have to resolve them, because they undermine democratic legitimacy. If we start resolving them just for reasons of fairness or distributive justice, that will not make democracy prevail. That's it. Thank you. Sorry.